Etherfuse, I think, can be defined by our mission, which is to lift the interface of bond yield to the general user and the general developer. I actually didn't care too much about crypto until it was quick and cheap. And back then, the top three were China, India, and Mexico. If you looked at like the characteristics of banking access, money being sent across borders, and like cost of credit was another thing we looked at. We kind of are a lot alike, especially if you compare us to our European counterparties, I think that fundamentally bonds are the building blocks of nations. And I think crypto has kind of gone backwards, where we've issued a token that's more like a currency first.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Frontera. I'm Mav, co-founder and CEO of Espacio Cripto, and Bando. And in this episode, we have Dave, the CEO of Etherfuse. And also I'm with my longtime friend Kush. And Dave, today we're going to talk about what you're building in Etherfuse. How are you building it in Latin America? So thank you for coming. How are you, man?
Thank you. I'm doing good. I've been a fan and we've been friends for a little bit. So I appreciate getting to come on the pod and talk with you all. I'm a listener and especially a big fan of Espacio Cripto. As a gringo, it's hard to break into the Latin American scene, but I feel like this is one step further where I'm into general acceptance.
Welcome to the tribe, Dave. Great to have you
Thank
here,
you. Thank you.
Yeah, and for all gringos and non-gringos listening to Frontera, remember to subscribe to the newsletter. There we post a lot of the analysis that we're seeing on how the crypto ecosystem is evolving in our region. And Dave, first of all, I'd love to understand a little bit of your background, because you're a seasoned engineer. You worked at Apple, you have an MBA from MIT. And now you're launching something on Solana in Latin America, something really specific of crypto. How did you end up in this industry?
Yeah, kind of like I have mentioned before, I think we wanted to do something really interesting, kind of dangerous or bold, I guess I would say, and exciting. I had a pretty good career. I've been in computer security, cryptography, like the real cryptography, for quite some time. I'd say in my professional career, I did PKI on Boeing airplanes to enable you to load software onto airplanes and run it to make sure it's the right type of software. After that, we were at Apple. I did a lot of asset security and APIs for PKI and things like that. You probably use some of the security measures that we built. And things were fine. I did end up deciding, after I was at Apple, I was feeling like, I like working for somebody, but I also like to learn how to do something on my own. I came from Arizona, so not really anywhere connected well. So I didn't have like the network to jump out and start a company. So I did go to school. I went back to MIT and I met a friend there. His name's Isaac Saldana. He started a company called SendGrid, which did really well. And when we were in school together, we decided to start a startup studio. So what a startup studio is it's like a venture builder, except you invest in more heavily, take a higher equity position, and then you like get it to like a Series A and you spin it out. So we built a few companies together, and one of them was a company called Neural Payments. And Neural Payments was, if you're in the United States or familiar with sending money here, there's a company called Zelle, and Zelle is pretty much owned by the big banks, and it enables you to pay a person-to-person P2P payments in the US. So credit unions don't like that, so we built a comparable product that did P2P for credit unions. Anyways, after working in the guts, what I would say, of payments, it just became super, super obvious that it's this bloated, antiquated system, and there's not really a way to fix it. You just have to leap it. And so as we're building this, the CTO, who is AJ, my brother, actually, and now co-founder Etherfuse, we were just talking like, this is impossible to fix. It's bloated, it's slow. And then crypto, or the blockchain, started to get faster. Solana specifically caught our eye. It was sub-second speeds or second speeds. And settlement from one person to the next in under a second was this crazy idea compared to traditional systems. which actually, in Latin America, you don't really have. So there's a lot of real-time Latin American payment systems, but in the States, it is not that fast. And any kind of application that enables you to send money or settle money quicker is just somebody taking a fee from real settlement and diminishing your money and making it look quicker. So that is the long story of how we got into crypto. It was, to us, we were working in the payments world and just saw the blockchain growing and the technology improving. And we just said, this is the future. This is really going to be something that's going to be important in 10 years. And I think I was at a point in my career where I was like, I want to do something bold, and so we jumped in.
What stood out? I mean, obviously you had sort of an architecture decision between the Ethereum ecosystem and Solana, but you took quite an early bet on the Solana ecosystem, right? And so I'd love to hear more about sort of the decision there, why because at the time that wasn't a consensus sort of bet to make. Right now it's every day more so the case, but I'd love to hear more around and particularly coming from quite a strong engineering background, sort of what you observe, because I think that's one of the things Solana has done really well, is their focus isn't how do we onboard Ethereum developers into our ecosystem, but rather how do we onboard ex-Apple, ex-Boeing people and have them come build really cool things. So I'm curious, just psychologically, what was going on in your mind as you made that decision?
I can't deny that probably the primary decision or the first step in making the decision was that Solana's built in Rust and we were Rust engineers. So that was a part of it for sure. And it wasn't like the decision because we could also build in, JavaScript, so Solidity and stuff like that. But we were interested in that programming language. And so as Solana started to grow, it became kind of this thing that was growing in this space we cared about. And it really was what caught our eye. I would say second to that, it just had all these signs of the innovator's dilemma or if you do go to business school, not that I'm saying you need to, there's all this talk about new technologies being kind of like counterculture and people hate it. And then you look at it, but they have a lot of users. Crypto was like this, in the early days, cryptography was like this in the early days of PGP and things it was all these radical type people and everyone's getting in trouble, but it was obvious new technology. And the Solana ecosystem just really felt like that. So when we started to look at it and use it and see that it was fast, it was built in Rust, and then just the community felt the community, and it's still, maybe it's getting out of it, but it still feels like a story where there's this ragtag group that's performing really well and everybody hates them. And so it was like a contrarian bet that we felt comfortable with. I don't know if I answered very concisely, but it was a few data points that made us feel like, actually, this is fast. Actually, a lot of people think it sucks. Actually, the community here is smart people doing stuff, working fast. And so I think it was a mixture of those things that let us make a gut decision to push forward with it.
Nice. Yeah, I was just curious, right? Because I think Alvin and I think a lot about how do we onboard more builders from the region. And in particular, what leads someone to build on Solana versus elsewhere. And I think, every day these things are less so sort of mutually exclusive, right? So, but yeah, I would love to dive into more of the journey and then how Etherfuse comes to be and, how the idea sort of is born. Because I think I always love these sort of founder explorations and navigating the idea maze. So walk us through that.
So, we were building neuropayments. It was doing well. And we just kind of saw Solana growing. We saw payments getting quicker, and that was important. Payments getting quicker was really, really important. I actually didn't care too much about crypto until it was quick and cheap. Because once it was quick and cheap, I felt like, okay, this could solve a lot of people's problems. But fundamentally, we said back 3 years ago, it feels like a lifetime ago now, but everyone 3 years ago was saying nothing we're doing is a security, and the US hated crypto. And so we're in the US, everyone's kind of lying about if something's being an investment. And both AJ and I just said, hey, what if we didn't say it wasn't a security? What if we just said, hey, we want to do something real and we're going to acknowledge that it is a security. And so what do we do? That was kind of how would we do it? Well, we did some explorations and looked at the US and just felt, man, if I raise seed here, I'm going to spend 2 million on a lawyer, and I don't even know if the answer of can I do this will be answered to me, and I don't know that it'll be yes, you know? So we just said, where could we go where there's a potential for a user base and for a country to be incentivized to say yes? And I mean, you know the story now because we are in Mexico, but back then it was really just we sat in a room and we looked at a map and we looked at a bunch of data, almost like a kind of like a consulting ourselves. You know, we looked at, you know, where are the most flows of money? Where are what type of people struggle the most with financial products? And back then, the top three were China, India, and Mexico. If you looked at like the characteristics of, you know, banking access, money being sent across borders, and like cost of credit was another thing we looked at. China is a no-go. You know, it's too authoritarian. They're never going to say yes to two people from the U.S. coming build something as critical as a bond or something on some financial infrastructure. So we just knew that that wouldn't work. I've done a lot of work in India too, and India is also pretty defensive as far as you come in there as a foreigner, you build a startup, they'll build it out from under you and kind of create some defensive products. Everyone kind of knows this who's done this in this space. So, but when we kind of thought about Mexico, I've always grew up on the border, so appropriate podcast. So culturally, we're a lot alike, to be honest. I know we have our differences and people think we're not, or people would kind of push that the US and Mexico, as an example, are not a lot alike, but we kind of are a lot alike, especially if you compare us to our European counterparties, you know. Spain or the English, I think we both feel more aligned with the Americas. And when we looked at Mexico too, we're looking at, like, you know, 40% of the country is unbanked. Cost of credit, at least back then, it was like 35%, crazy high, you know. And remittances was just, you know, huge. As we know, remittances, you know, one of the primary revenue streams for a lot of people there. And so we hypothesized, if we approached the government and said, hey, we got this new technology, we want to build it, that even though other people didn't believe us, that they would say yes. And that was the craziest bet I've ever made. And now looking back, I think it's even crazier that I even thought that might be a good idea. But, you know, what essentially happened was, and I don't know if I'm skipping the question, but we came to Mexico and we found a good lawyer and we said, hey, how can we approach the government, or what's the pathway to do something like this? And we approached this this law or this pathway called the Sandbox model, which is, they have a lot of this across the world. And one particular that Mexico copied is in Britain. The idea was, if you felt you have a new technology, you could approach the Mexican government and say, I think this is new. There's no existing laws that can cover it, and we want to work with you and develop it. And if they say yes, you get this like short-term monopoly, like 4 or 5 years, and you work under their guidance. And if they say no, then the answer is they don't believe that it's new or it's not a security or something like that. So we worked with the CNBV for 2 years, and the outcome was better than we could have expected. The outcome was essentially 200 plus pages of descriptions of why they don't think our protocol specifically falls under the characteristics of a security.
And just to provide context, the CNBV is like the Mexican SEC.
Correct. It's the SEC of Mexico. Yeah. And that was like the best answer we could have ever asked for, right? If they would have said yes, we'd be working with them. It'd be slow. It'd be a 4-year outlook. Who knows like where it would go? We would have a monopoly, and that'd be great. If they would just say no with no guidance, we wouldn't know what to do. But really, they said no, and here's why. And we published actually a highly restricted version of their response on our website. If you want to look under about us, you know, in our app.etherfuse.com. where we actually have the response notarized. We black out a lot because it gives us huge competitive advantage in Mexico. Right now, we're the only company in Mexico with any sort of legal authority to tokenize an asset, a yield-bearing asset. So that's pretty cool for us. But we notarize that document so we can show people. And that's essentially the craziest path we took to come into Mexico. We believed in it. We felt that the characteristics of the place were there. We felt we could do something that benefit the people there. And then we think those three things would lead the government to say yes to us. And in a roundabout way, they did.
I think that listening to your story is a bunch of contrarian bets going right.
Yes.
Building in Mexico, was back then, 3 years ago in Mexico, Solana, something that might be a security, so you need to work hand in hand with the government. I think that a lot of crypto builders go the other way. Like, what's the biggest market with the most simple deployment, where maybe I do not have to talk to any regulator? And you've mentioned this a couple of times, but Etherfuse, basically, I really like the word that you created, that it's stable bonds. I think, are you the creators of that word? I think that's the first time that I see it.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. You feel kind of crazy as a founder when you're inventing an idea or a concept. And, most of this, like a lot of these conversations, these topics are kind of normal now. We talk about yield bearing, but 3 years ago, it was like I sat in a room for 3 months and I wrote 2 papers. And the paper is our neon, and you can look at it, neon.etherfuse.com or black.etherfuse.com. And it was the concept of a stable bond, which is the reason we chose that. It's the interface of a stable coin, but really backed by a bond, 100%, and yield is returned to the user. So that's what we wanted to get at. Is it's the same thing, the same. About sneeze, my eyes are watering. Sorry, but it's the exact same interface, but it's a bond. And the way I thought about it is, when you go to Tether or USDC, you give them $1. They give you a token, and they take 75% of that dollar, at least USDC. And they put it in a bond, and the other they put in cash. And so what we would do is we do that exact same thing, except for you give me $1, I'd put 100% of it in a bond. And so it's similar but different, and that's what we were going for.
Yeah, and we're gonna link this in the show notes. The thing that you said, I think that this one is neon.etherfuse.com and then black.etherfuse.com. These are 6 pagers, so it's really concise. I mean, I thought that it was gonna be. I haven't read this. I'll take a look, but I came to the thing that you were saying about. Well, the thing that I said about stable bonds, because as a founder, there's this eternal debate on building on a category or creating a category. Yeah. And when you're establishing like a specific category as stable bond, it's something new. As you said, 3 years ago, it was something absolutely no one was talking about it. Today, there are a bunch of competitors doing similar things like Mountain Protocol and many others. Dave, I'd love to understand, in a nutshell, what is Etherfuse?
Etherfuse, I think, can be defined by our mission, which is to lift the interface of bond yield to the general user and the general developer. So if you look at, like, one of the problems we think that exists is most of fees are passed on to users, which are the poorest of the mix. So you have asset holders, you have application developers, you have companies, and then users use that. So it's like this people facilitating payment, all these layers, and the least wealthy are the people, right? Well, there's some gatekeeping involved from bonds, and people don't even have access to banking infrastructure. Like, it's 40% of Mexico. Even less, it's like 2% have access to bonds directly. And most times you buy a bond, you have to pay these minimums. Like, for us, we had to pay. I mean, I don't even know. We got a pretty good deal, but for you to buy and sell bonds in Mexico, it's insane cost, just so you know. And so when you go and buy a bond from me for $1.50, just know that that's a huge innovation. But if we can lift up and make that bond yield available to anyone with an SDK, that we can eliminate fees for the user, and we can give application developers and everyone else in that stack revenue streams from bond yield. And so Etherfuse's mission statement is to onboard the whole world's sovereign or government debt on chain. So access to government debt is available on chain to anyone in the world, and that through that we bring the foreign exchange markets into DeFi. So that's fundamentally what Etherfuse does. Is we take government short-term treasuries, we tokenize them in the form of a stablecoin that earns yield, and we make it available to anyone.
I love that. I love that. And I think so to Ab's point, right, is you either, when you're navigating the idea maze, is you either come up with this premise of, I'm going to test this hypothesis in the market and sort of figure out pain points for people and then find a product to build given these constraints. I like the approach that you guys took, where you found sort of an arbitrage opportunity in the market. You said there's these sort of high yielding government issued bonds. We want to bring these to market. And not only do we want to bring these particular ones, we want to bring all sort of sovereign bonds on chain, right? And we think Solana is sort of the best place for us to do that. We were talking before we started recording about a team that I work very closely with, the Bondi team, that is focused on emerging market corporate bonds that end up yielding sort of higher yields. Oftentimes, you might argue with higher risk, obviously, on the other side of that, right? But walk us through why you think in particular bringing sovereign bonds on chain is really exciting and a huge problem, and why this is, of all the things you could be building, this is the one that you've decided to really tackle. And what do you think this brings to DeFi and the sort of wider crypto ecosystem?
Yeah. So part of it is, I think we can win this space. I think we are uniquely tackling this space. So that's probably the biggest part. But like our regulatory umbrella is we can tokenize anything. So we could do corporate debt, we could do equities, we could do things like that. But I think that fundamentally bonds are the building blocks of nations. And I think crypto has kind of gone backwards, where we've issued a token that's more like a currency first, where if you look back at history at the beginning of like Venice and the early Middle Ages, the thing that really worked was the bond interface. And so I think that we took one step forward with stablecoins, and we said this is the first, what I would say, product market fit. But I actually believe we would have been better if we would have done bonds first. And so we are looking at that and recognizing it and saying bonds need to exist in order for this ecosystem to succeed, and no one's really doing it. I would say the person closest to us, or the product closest to what we're doing, is in fact Martin, who's awesome, and their product's great, and you should buy their dollar product, their yield product. But what differentiates us is we are doing everything else in addition to that, but we are really focused on the sovereign nations around the world that are non-US, because no one's really serving those people. And at some point, it's going to be an issue. It will be a problem. So people will want to onboard these different countries and offboard to these different countries. And we think the stable bond product is the kind of interface to those places.
Yeah, so I wanted to double click on this point you mentioned, is bonds are the building blocks for nations. And I think in particular, when we think about, and this, I'm a big fan of sort of the network society thesis. And I think that's one of the exciting things about crypto, is we can literally build new nations. So I'm excited, and we saw El Salvador trying to issue Bitcoin-backed sovereign bonds as well. And so I'm excited to see just like more exploration, more dynamism here. And also, and I'm curious if you've thought about how can we spin up, there's like Praxis, there's Prospera, there are all these sort of new startup societies that, particularly in Latin America, have a lot of PMF, right? Like, have you thought about this intersection of Etherfuse's work, sovereign bonds, and network societies, and what can transpire at this intersection?
Yeah, I mean, really what you need is a revenue stream to start a bond. So even like a new network state or network society could issue their own sovereign debt, but they'd have to start with some revenue stream. So like back in the Middle Ages, a lot of them was like wine cells or taxes. So it is something we could do, I think though you have to find some stream of revenue first, and then you can build a network state on top of that. And I do think, we haven't really looked into this too much. Like, our first goal is to get the existing sovereign nations on board, and then we'll look at other use cases for sure.
Totally. No, I was, I think I'm always sort of thinking like 5 steps ahead here when I see a product like Etherfuse. I'm like, great, like what can we unlock here? But yeah, super exciting, man.
So,
I love what you guys are building.
But another answer to your same question is, why are we, like, everyone and their dog is fighting for the US dollar and yield bearing assets there. And that competition has created what I would say a perfect market where the fees go to zero. So if you compared us with, and this is kind of true in the real world too, like buying and selling or managing assets for US treasuries, you can charge, very low fees. So that just makes starting a company very hard because you don't have something that you can generate revenue on and grow, right? Well, the yields are so high in these other economies that our fees can be bigger. And those bigger fees are comparable to what's in the real world. And we can still do that while saving, money for our users. Just as an example, I mean, this is all available on our site, but if you're offering like a yield bearing US product, you're earning 10 bips, a year for each dollar. So if you have $100 million, you are earning about the same amount as Etherfuse is if we have $7 million in assets. So I don't know why no one recognizes the opportunity. And they tell me they think it's dumb too. But I honestly, this is our final contrarian bet that I think this is the smartest way to go. Is everything else. No one's doing it. There's a better fee model. It adds more value to the rest of the world. It's coming. And so we hope to win this space for sure.
I think that the stories that you are telling us, Dave, I just keep thinking about the classical, I don't know, the classical recipe for innovators that when you were talking about the innovator's dilemma and all of that. And I remember that you told me that if you have a government bond, a Mexican government bond, if you do like the backtracking 20 years, 10 years, it always performs better than the dollar for the past, I think that 10 years or something like that, right?
Yeah, maybe always isn't the right word, but it is competitive. So it is competitive with US treasuries if you look back on a 20-year outlook to hold CETES. In the short term, you might not feel that, but if you're looking for a long-term investment, and the reason is kind of intuitive, it's, these governments, when they inflate the price of their currency, they still need the revenues to come in through investment. So the way they continue to keep revenues coming in is they increase their yield. And so even though it may be more volatile, averaged out over time, I think if you would have held CETES for the last 3 years compared to the US dollar, it performs like 3% better. So
and that's crazy.
It's crazy, yeah.
That's crazy because I just wrote here in my notebook, we're talking about Mountain Protocol. Martin is an Argentinian building a stable coin of the US dollar that provides yield. And you are an American looking at the emerging market to do the same thing. Yep. And I think that that's a combination of ingenuity, like having the understanding of the market and like this innovator's drive, and also kind of naivety in a good way, because I'm Mexican and I'm not building that, right? And I've been like in crypto for a long time, and maybe in my mind was that's gonna be so hard that maybe I don't want to do it. And maybe if you as an American think, okay, tokenizing a T-bill, that's gonna be so hard that someone else is doing it. So like the external person coming to the environment with the classical thing of we are not doing this because it's easy, but because we thought it was gonna be easy, and at the end it was super hard. And on that topic, I'd love to understand what's been the biggest challenge that you faced building for Latin America and in Latin America.
I think the biggest challenge is trust. The the peso was doing super well like a year ago. And so things were going our way, and comparable to the US dollar, but that's changed quite a bit. But in addition to that, just trust in the world, in the Latin American type of products. Carlos Slim made a ton of money understanding that Latin American products are underpriced, and part of that is some weird bias for the rest of the world that they don't believe in those products as much, or they don't trust them as much. And maybe some of that's earned by, the government's creating that kind of chaos. But I would say that's been our biggest problem is we're tapping smaller markets collectively where, so for each new asset type, we need a brokerage, we need a custodian, we need a new regulatory environment. Not really, but you need a little bit of like, how do I set up a bank here type of stuff. Where if you just go to the West, you get one product, you have a big market. It's a little bit easier from an operational perspective. Comparing us to other people, a lot of people go, I would say, breadth first search, where they go, I'm going to have one product across every chain. Where we've kind of gone depth, where we want many products on one or two chains. Right now we're on Stellar, Canton, and Solana. And I don't know that we're going to do too much work to move to other chains. I mean, we will with the opportunity there, but so that would be the biggest. Is it's harder to work in Latin America. It takes longer, and then there's not this like general global consensus that it's something trustworthy. And so we've dealt with that quite a bit.
Yeah. I think that in Frontera, we're trying to adjust that consensus because it's so obvious for me and Kush that the opportunity is here, and something that personally I've identified is that maybe some of the best founders to tackle this market are not in the region. We've talked about 3 founders in this episode. You guys are from the US, Martin and the Mountain Protocol, they're from Argentina, and the Bondi guys, they are Turkish, right? So they are also emerging markets but coming to Latin America. So I think that there's a trend there, and this program is created to help everyone land here. And something that you mentioned that I think is really critical, you mentioned we have the idea, we got a good layer, and that get us going, right? Not specifically having like a good team, but I think that I'd love to understand, how do you find good people in Mexico? Because you and I have discussed this, how hard it is, and what was your story there?
Well, so from an engineering perspective, we have like the best of the best, but they're people I already knew, so they aren't from Mexico. We have built a team in Mexico. We have some of the best people there. But our engineering, I got lucky, or maybe not lucky. I've worked in really good places. I have a good network of people. And so when we decided to go build, we knew who could build. I'm older than most founders, maybe at least in crypto. So I'm 43, and where most are like 12. There's 14. I don't know.
Teenagers building games.
If you use our app, I mean, I'm just going to brag a little bit. We have the best app for managing RWAs in the world. It's far superior to anything else. Show me anything else, we kill them. It's so fast, it's so smooth. You guys should try it out. Our engineers are the best in the world, and they have had successful careers. They're friends, and I know them really well. So we were lucky by already having that, coming to the table with that. And so, but yeah, the other parts were really hard. We flew, I flew to Mexico and just started poking around, to be honest. I don't speak the best Spanish either. So we really just kind of took perseverance and I would say guts and luck and put it all together.
Yeah. And Dave, I think, certainly on the team composition front, I think that's really what matters. It's certainly something that we oftentimes navigate with working out of the region. Is okay, how do you find people who are competent enough? And there's a reason there's an arbitrage, right? And you have to, I think, hire your way out of that arbitrage fundamentally, right? And I think it's like, once you manage to do that, the opportunities are boundless in the region. I mean, it's like, there are so many businesses where I'm like, I want to start a construction company where people show up on time, it's like you could start any business where people show up on time, where they do what they're going to say, and they don't overcharge you for it, right?
Yeah.
And that business idea would completely take off in Latin America. And I think even when you add to the layer, technology into that, it's like, boom, there you go. You've found yourself sort of a gold mine. And I think it's sort of the insight that a lot of people are realizing and coming to, especially as the world sort of shrinks and one's capacity to be able to operate successfully in Mexico as an American or as a Turkish person in Argentina is like, much more capable. So I think that's really exciting. I want to talk about go for it.
I said, we ran Super Team Mexico. We were the founders of Super Team Mexico. There are amazing engineers in Mexico that are not underpaid. I don't know if that's the right word. That are a screaming deal compared to the equivalent engineer in the U.S. or in like Europe or something. So, there's a huge community. If I was going to look for engineers in this space, I would just join the communities. Stellar has an awesome community in Mexico, and just get to know them. And then there's fantastic engineering caliber, like top tier caliber engineers in Mexico. So it's there's arbitrage there as far as like skills. So I agree with kind of what you were saying, the sentiment you were bringing.
For sure. Yeah. No, it's it's, I think something, I think an insight that we're, again, all I think sensing to some extent. So let's talk a little bit more about Etherfuse's go-to-market strategy and, sovereign bonds or what all the sovereign wealth funds are buying. It's what nation states are buying. A lot of these people aren't on chain yet, right? And so tell us more about that go-to-market strategy for you and how you think about who's actually going to be buying these bonds. Because, if I think about where do I want to be parking my money, maybe it's on Camino with some sort of delta neutral like JLP strategy that's yielding double-digit sort of yields, right? And if I get the whole like diversify your portfolio thesis as like a retail, or even if you think about it from an institutional angle, but I'm not here for like the stable like 7 to 10% yields, right? That's super vanilla, right? But the big money is, but they're not on chain yet. So how do you think about sort of closing that gap, and who are you looking to service now, and who do you look to service in the coming years, and what will bring those people on chain?
That's the golden question. I think that's the only thing preventing us from being $1 billion company today is having solved that problem. To be honest, I agree. I think we're very early, especially for this type of product. I do think we'll survive though. So we've learned through failure, it has to be a DeFi centric approach. And I really regret a lot of the future RWA experiences that people are going to have. But we have a very awesome regulatory like umbrella where our assets are open to secondary markets. If you would go to somewhere else and try to issue an interest-bearing product, like in the West, they would make sure that it was locked down and secondary markets aren't open. So for us, DeFi is a vertical that we can approach to get users. And the people we think who are will buy these products initially will be app developers. So as an example, CETES are tokenized versions of collateral. And so the first use case for somebody to use our product is if they want to issue a stablecoin. And I don't know if you guys have seen, but Brel, in collaboration with Kappa, which I'm pretty sure you know about, or XOC, they've issued a Mexican stablecoin called MXNE, and it is outperforming Bitso's and Tether's stablecoin by 150x. And all they had to do was use our SDK. And so we think, that's the first kind of use case, is finding people who are building products. So if you're building a wallet to send money back and forth, well, our tokens are the same thing as interest-bearing checking accounts. So you could abstract the token from the user, and you could say, you have a balance of this amount of MXN. Now you have that revenue to your disposal, that yield. You can issue a stablecoin, and you have all our policy and our transparency and our collateral at your disposal. So that's the first use case. Maybe you'll have to have me back on, but we have probably one of the hugest announcements in crypto coming up in Q2, where we are onboarding one of the bigger institutions in the area. And part of that's because we're the only company in Mexico that has the regulatory authority to do something like this. So we are onboarding the institutions. Those are coming, but the first user is a developer, in my opinion.
Nice. I feel like that makes a ton of sense when you think about, okay, here we have this infrastructure fundamentally, and we're selling picks and shovels. And whilst maybe this like product that we build on top of these picks and shovels might take some time, here's how we keep the ship running, and here's how we demonstrate that people actually want the product.
Yeah.
On the institutional front, go for it. Yeah.
Well, also like these are tools for blockchains too. One of our big purchasers is actually a blockchain. And if you think about it, if we're successful getting the world's debt on chain, we've opened up all sorts of currency and foreign exchange opportunities that gives your DeFi ecosystem value. A lot of people saw a lot of value with the meme coin space, but if we are successful, now foreign exchange is on chain. And that's pretty impressive. So I think we also look at blockchains as our customers as well.
Nice. Yeah. FX on chain, really excited for that. And I've seen a lot of movement happening, particularly in the base ecosystem around bringing more local stable coins. And clearly there's a BRZ, a USDC
Yep.
pool on Aerodrome that's yielding like 300%. I'm definitely providing liquidity there.
Cool.
There's obviously incentives behind that. Yeah.
I love those guys. I was just in Brazil with Transfero. So BRZ, great product. Check out MXNE on Aerodrome. I think we're at 360 right now, 360% yield. So provide liquidity there.
I'm definitely gonna be an MXNE whale. You mentioned institutions, Dave. Like, let's talk about what that's been like and your relationship with institutions, particularly if you're dealing with Latin American institutions and how they think about coming on chain.
That's the most frustrating, annoying thing ever, to be honest. Institutions are great, but they have no sense of urgency, and they shouldn't. They have the innovator's dilemma. They can only lose. They are in the top tier position, but the U.S. leadership in the U.S. has changed, and that is driving a lot of other places to take a real hard look and to compete. So now they have to compete. So onboarding institutions sucks. I would hate to have that job because it is like just it take forever, man. Don't make decisions and you're kind of at their mercy. But they are big players. This is another kind of prediction I have about U.S. products is everyone focused on the U.S. Is going to have a hard time once there's clear policy because you're going to see these big banks with trillions and trillions of dollars issue huge TVL and volumes, and that's going to be a tough place to compete.
Around these institutions, I think that the best essay I've read about working with institutions is the classical Mark Andreessen, the Moby Dick theory of big companies, that basically Moby Dick cares about other whales, not about the captain trying to hunt Moby Dick.
Yes.
And
yes.
Whatever you do, it's going to be slow. Dave, thank you for coming to Frontera, man. I really appreciate it. Whenever you drop that news, you need to come to the pod and let us know everything that how that come about, what's the announcement, and basically all of that. And I'd love to close all Fronteras. We want to help other builders around the world land in Latin America and in the Spanish-speaking world, in Brazil. What would you recommend for anyone looking at this market? What would be the advice that would save you days, even not months, if you've got it when you started?
It's a tough regulatory environment, and so I would say, this might not be great advice, but I would say find what you think is the easiest path to get some sort of license to start, and then just start. You're never going to get a clear answer. I could never do what we did again. It took 2 years, and I don't know that that's the wisest. I might go to the Caymans, I might go to Dubai, or I might go to El Salvador and kind of have a rough idea what my product is and get a license from them and then grow from there. Because you can successfully be regulated out of one place and still have like institutional access to Brazil and other places, as long as you have some clear guidelines from that small place. So I don't know if that's the most concrete sense, but if you can get a license and some regulatory ability from El Salvador, you can now go to Brazil and make an institutional account and interact with the economy for way less time than you could just by going to Brazil directly. So that would be my advice. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll give you my secret info that I would never say publicly. That'll help you out too.
Amazing. Dude, thank you for coming. And how can people reach out to Etherfuse, and how can people reach out to you?
I'm Etherfuse Dave on Twitter, or Etherfuse on Twitter, and on Telegram, I'm also Etherfuse. I've had this name for quite some time, so if you Google Etherfuse, I'm usually behind it. So hit me up on
Amazing.
Telegram or Twitter.
What's the story behind Etherfuse?
It's kind of a funny story. I built a product when I was at Apple. I was like, I want to build something, and I built a product that would aggregate all of the data on your router, and it would show you what the devices are doing in your home. This was like before this was like something you could buy. Then a company Circle came out like when I was halfway done, and it's not the Circle we know, but it was this like kind of like router management thing. And so I gave up on the idea. So every year I'd see the domain name etherfuse.com go to be renewed, and it started to just tell me like, hey, you're not following your dream, you know? And so after 8-9 years, it was more like, this is my destiny, you know? So Etherfuse, everyone hates it because we're in Solana. They think it's Ethereum, but really it's a name for myself. It helps me get up every day and like continue to when there's no good answers, to keep going.
That's amazing. I always say this. You remember the Inception movie that Leonardo DiCaprio has this little thing that spins?
Yeah.
And he calls him a totem. I believe in totems in the real life, like things that you see every day. Like a keychain is a good totem because you see it every day. That reminds you about that. And definitely the name, it's a good totem for you. So, dude, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
You can find me at AbrahamCR. Kush is 0xKush on X. And thank you for listening to this Frontera. Remember to subscribe to our newsletter, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Peace.